Welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Governor Christie, for graciously accepting our invitation to come to campus and sharing your perspective with students and the Upper Valley community. My name is Grace Wilkins, and I'm the PR Director of the Dartmouth Political Union, the preeminent nonpartisan student-led political organization here on campus. The DPU has joined the Rockefeller Center to co-sponsor this event series entitled The Path to the Presidency. For today's program, we have asked Governor Christie to make some opening remarks and then hold a moderated discussion, followed by questions from the audience. Professor Anna Mahoney, Executive Director of the Rockefeller Center, will moderate our discussion. Dr. Mahoney earned a BA from Loyola University in Mass Communications, an MA in Women's Studies from the University of Alabama, and a PhD in Political Science from Rutgers University. Mahoney previously served as Director of Research and Administrative Associated Professor of Women's Political Leadership at the Newcomb Institute at Tulane University. When we get to the Q&A portion of our program, we will have a microphone available for our in-person audience questions on the theater landing. While an audience member is asking a question, we ask that there only be one additional person waiting on the landing so that you are not obstructing the view of other attendees. If you are joining us remotely, please submit your questions during the first 20 minutes of our program by emailing rockyqa@dartmouth.edu. Please keep audience questions brief so that we can allow time for as many questions as possible. We would also like to emphasize the importance of maintaining a respectful dialogue throughout our event. Our esteemed guest today, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, served two terms as governor of the state of New Jersey, taking on the biggest and toughest challenges with real solutions and bipartisan cooperation. He implemented an aggressive reform agenda to restore fiscal sanity, lower property taxes, rein in the state's pension and health benefit system, expand school choice, and address the opioid epidemic. Governor Christie led the state's recovery after Superstorm Sandy, the worst natural disaster in its history, rebuilding the state's housing, infrastructure, and public schools, and setting an example for bipartisan leadership. As a Republican, he was reelected with 60% of the vote in one of the bluest states in the country. In 2017, Governor Christie was appointed chairman of the President's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis. The commission's final report contained more than 65 substantive recommendations, all of which were adopted by President Trump. Prior to his time as governor, he was nominated by President George W. Bush for U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, where he served for 7 years, bringing high-profile anti-terrorism cases and successfully prosecuting 130 political corruption cases. Governor Christie and his wife of 37 years, Mary Pat, have 4 children: Andrew, Sarah, Patrick, and Bridget. Please join me in welcoming Governor Christie and Professor Mahoney to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for having me here today. It is good to be back at Dartmouth. The last time I was here was when I was bringing my daughter to come here and visit because she was thinking about coming here. She has since graduated from Notre Dame, unfortunately, which makes her one of those really obnoxious Notre Dame people. As you know, when she said she wanted to come, decided she wanted to go to Notre Dame, I said to her, look, it's fine. You can go wherever you want to go. I said, but please don't become one of those obnoxious Notre Dame people. And she promised me she wouldn't. And then she came home for Thanksgiving, and I said, how's school? She's like, Dad, it is the greatest place on earth. And I'm like, it's South Bend, Indiana. And she insisted that it was still the greatest place on earth, so she had officially become one of those obnoxious Notre Dame people, and it's never changed. But it's good to be back here. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'm looking forward to the most for your questions. But I'll say a couple of things off the top, and then we can get to our moderated conversation and our audience Q&A. It is an extraordinarily dangerous time in the world. And it's a lot more dangerous now than it was even 3 weeks ago. And I think that it's time in this country for us to have serious people once again to be president of the United States. It's time to dispense with like TV tough guys and people who aren't serious and aren't prepared to be president, who can't give you complicated answers to complicated questions, but insult you by giving you easy answers to difficult questions, and then have no way of even knowing how they would implement the answers to those questions. Now, when the world is at peace and the economy is going well, um, those kind of folks aren't what I'd want as president, but we can live with them. In times like this, we need people who have the character to deal with the really difficult problems that confront this country and the rest of the world. So I'd start off by saying to you that as you start to consider your vote in this election, whether you're voting here in New Hampshire during the primary or whether you're voting in whatever state you come to Dartmouth from, the first and most important consideration for any candidate for president is character. And the reason for that is that no matter what question you ask me today, no matter how many questions you ask me today, you're never going to be able to ask me everything that would come in front of me when I became president of the United States. Going back 23 years, no one asked George W. Bush or Al Gore in that campaign, well, what would you do if 11 terrorists took over 4 U.S. jetliners, flew 2 of them into the World Trade Center, 1 of them into the Pentagon, and aimed 1 of them at the United States Capitol? Nobody could even have fathomed that as a possibility. In the end, it's the character of the person sitting behind that desk as to whether we come through a crisis like that successfully or not. And fortunately for us, we haven't had another foreign terrorist attack in the United States since September 11th, 2001. And I remember that in particular because I was appointed U.S. Attorney for New Jersey on September 10th, 2001. And one of those airplanes flew out of Newark Airport in New Jersey that crashed into the World Trade Center. And in 2016, I was here running for president. No one asked any of us, what would you do if a once in every 100-year pandemic swept across the country and the world, killed 1 million Americans? What would you do to try to restore the public health of the country and the world while not ruining the nation's economy, educational system in the process? No one asked us. I was here. And the character of the person that we have behind the desk of the Oval Office then turned out, I think, to have his conduct lead to more deaths than there needed to be, led to more damage to our society than there needed to be, because he didn't put himself before, he put himself rather before the American people, rather than the other way around. He cared more about his reelection than he cared about making sure that the right thing was done to deal with COVID as quickly as we possibly could. Character matters. And it matters more than any one particular issue for that reason. It's the biggest reason I got into this race. If you had asked me a year ago whether I intended to run for president again, I would have told you no. But when I saw that Donald Trump was running again, and I saw that the people who were lining up against him were not only unwilling to criticize him, but they were unwilling to even say his name. I mean, it's like this guy's Voldemort. You know, it's like they're all like, you know, we no longer need chaos and drama in the Republican Party from our leadership. You know what I mean? They feared even saying his name. And I just decided there is no way that we can let him be president again, and no way that we can have this campaign where no one's willing to take him on and take him on directly. And so the first motivation for me in getting into this race was to make sure that someone was here to tell the truth about what happened when he was president, because he certainly won't, and tell the truth about what it would mean if our party nominated him again and left us with a choice of 78-year-old Donald Trump and 82-year-old Joe Biden. Now, when I say that, my kids call me an ageist, which is an interesting description. I would just say this. I don't oppose either of those folks because they're 78 and 82. But I'm not going to ignore that they're 78 and 82 and what impact being that age has on your ability to lead. You just have to look at both of them and listen to both of them to know that it's a truism that Father Time always wins. But it's a truism because it's true. Father Time always wins. It affects different people at different paces. But we need a president who actually has the energy and the strength to be able to do the things that need to be done in this job. Now, I also am worried as I look out at this group about what that generation of Americans has done to your future. And I feel kind of for you the way I felt about myself in 1980 when I was a freshman at the University of Delaware. And inflation was double digits, and interest rates were double digits, unemployment was double digits. We had hostages in Iran, and we had the Soviet army in Afghanistan. Does any of that sound kind of familiar to what we're living with now? And I came into college feeling a real sense of dread. Like, what was the hope for what was going to be there for me? And when you look at what's happening now and you add to it $33 trillion in debt, it's so much money that we can't even conceive of it. And the $13 trillion of that debt's been added in just the last 6 years. I'm not going to live long enough to pay that money back. And frankly, even you may not live long enough to pay all that money back. Maybe your kids. But we got to stop adding to it. And no one wants to talk about it. You know why? Because it's not popular to say you're not going to spend money. It's popular to say you will. But when you have to keep printing it to spend it, and it doesn't matter anymore, you got to start to worry about it. And I think we need to deal with our national debt and need to deal with what we're spending. Because if we don't deal with it, people are going to stop buying our debt. And when they do, it's going to be a really bad day for this country. The last thing I'll talk to you, because I really want to make this part short and make the rest of it much longer, is the dangerousness that I talked about at the beginning is something we need to address here at the end. To me, there is the foursome of evil in this world right now: Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia. And they are working together to disrupt the world. China is funding Russia's war against Ukraine every day. And Russia is obtaining weapons, not only from China, but also from North Korea and from Iran. Drone technology from Iran, further missile technology with North Korea. Iran, who is the banker of terrorism in the world, sponsors Hamas and Hezbollah and their own state-sponsored terrorism that is causing disruption in most of the Middle East and in other parts of the world as well, in Africa. And they are working together because if they can get us to back away and have our allies back away with us and create a vacuum of leadership in the world, they will fill it. Never, ever doubt that there will never be a vacuum of leadership in the world. There won't. If America backs away, someone will fill in. And the country that's looking to fill in right now is China. They're the second largest economy in the world. They're the second largest military in the world. And they're looking to be number one. I'm fine with the competition. I have no problem with competing in all those ways with China. But not if that competition is going to lead to violence and conflict all over the world. So we need to show strength during these times, and we need to support the people and the countries around the world that deserve and have earned that support through their alliances with us and the way they stand for freedom in the world. And so, yes, I'm for helping the Ukrainians. And I'm for helping the Ukrainians for two reasons. One, we promised them we would 30 years ago. When the Soviet Union fell, Ukraine had Soviet nuclear weapons on their property. They wanted to keep them. Why'd they want to keep them? They wanted to keep them to keep the Russians out. And we said, no, please return those to the Russians. And they said, we don't want to. We said, if you return them, if they ever invade you, we'll defend you. Based on that promise, they gave those nuclear weapons back. So first, we got to keep our word. Because if we don't, our word is worth nothing in the world, and that will not be very good for us or for our other friends in the world. Secondly, the Russians will not stop at Ukraine. Vladimir Putin will not stop at Ukraine. He has already said he thinks the fall of the Soviet Union was the worst event of his lifetime. He wants to put the old band back together. That means taking Ukraine and then next heading to the Baltics or to Poland. Problem for us in that would be this. All of those countries are members of NATO. And if they're attacked by Russia, then we have a treaty obligation to go over and fight that war. Right now, the Ukrainians are willing to fight that war themselves with Russia. And I went to Ukraine a little over 2 months ago, and I met with President Zelensky. And he told me that every time I was in front of a group of Americans where we were talking about Ukraine, he wanted me to say two things. First, thank you. That he thanks every American on behalf of the Ukrainian people for supporting them and helping them fight the invaders from Russia. And two, that they will never, ever accept American soldiers in this war. That it's a point of national pride for them. He joked with me that they've been occupied by Russia once. Russia's trying to occupy them again. They didn't like that either time. And they don't want to be occupied by us either. They want to be their own country. And so here we have a situation where we have contributed to Ukraine 5% of 1 year of our Pentagon budget. In return, they've degraded 50% of Russian military hardware. Seems like a pretty good return of investment on a promise that we had already made. And I think we need to show the Russians and the Chinese that if they invade one of our friends, that we will be there to help them. And if we do that, I think it will help to deter them doing it someplace else. And with Israel, the simple fact is that atrocities were visited upon the Israeli people in an unprovoked way on October 7th. Lots of innocent people, civilians were killed. And now we have a war over there that is going to be very, very difficult to resolve. Let us not forget, in my view, who started the war. It was Hamas who started the war, and now Hamas wants a ceasefire. That's like, you go out into the schoolyard and you come up from behind to somebody, you tap them on the shoulder, they turn around and you punch them in the face. And then when they get up off the ground, enraged, you say, okay, truce. If every one of us could get away with a sucker punch with no ramifications, what kind of world would this be? They sucker punch the Israelis. And the Israelis are at fault for that too, because their intelligence failed. Their military and civilian intelligence failed. They should have known that was coming, and they didn't. And I'm sure there are going to be ramifications for that too, politically down the road. But Israel is our greatest ally in the Middle East. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. And we need to stand with them. And I think we need to tell them they should do three things done. First, protect their territorial integrity and the safety and security of their people. That's the job of any government. Second, they should take actions to degrade Hamas's ability to ever do this again. But third, they need to remember that the real enemy here is Iran. And we need to continue to isolate Iran diplomatically in the world by Israel continuing to make agreements like they made with the UAE, like they've made with Egypt and Jordan and Morocco and other friendly countries and Jordan in the Middle East, the more they make agreements with those folks to have regular diplomatic relations, the more isolated Iran, who wants to wipe Israel off the map. And I saw a video this week of a leader of Hamas giving an interview who said they will not stop until they kill every Jew in the world. Well, I don't know how you have a ceasefire with somebody like that if they say that that's their goal. And so they need to make sure that we continue to isolate Iran, who sponsors groups like this, to make sure that we lower the possibility for further action like this rather than increase it. And the last thing I'll say is this before I take the moderated questions and your questions is I went to South Carolina 2 weekends ago and spoke at an African-American Baptist church in Beaufort, South Carolina. And one of the things that I said at the church that day, and which I really believe and want to leave you with, is that we live in the greatest country in the world, in the greatest neighborhood in the world, unless we decide to ruin it. And one of the ways we will certainly ruin it is if we forget to treat each other with love and respect. Either everyone in this audience is an American, or you're here studying at one of the great institutes of higher education in this world at America's invitation. And you have an obligation to set a tone of love and tolerance and respect for each other. I look around this room and I see lots of different people from lots of different ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, folks of both genders who come to this place from many, many different places to try to learn and to grow and to become better. And it won't happen if you have to live in fear. Have to live in fear first and foremost of your physical safety. But also it won't happen if you have to live in fear of expressing your views. Free speech is conditioned upon respect. Free speech is not free if when you try to use it, you're in fear for your life. It's not free if when you try to express yourself, you're shouted down. Free speech is not free if when you do it, you have to worry about whether or not you can continue to participate in a community like this in a way where you're welcomed. And when you use speech that's hateful and violent, it violates all of those tenets. Sometimes I think, and I certainly felt this way when I was in college, that I didn't know if anybody was paying attention to me. I didn't know how much I really mattered in the country at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. I didn't know. Let me guarantee you something. Everyone's watching you now. Everyone is watching. And everyone is listening. So the question you should be asking yourselves is, what do you want them to see? And what do you want them to hear? And I would hope that what you conclude is what you want them to see is a group of smart, caring, loving people who are trying to grow through the education that's being offered to you here every day. And I hope what you want them to hear is disagreement that's respectful and smart and informed. And when there's agreement, to have that agreement sound exactly the same way. Agreement and disagreement should sound no different. You can hear it differently because of the words that are used, but it should sound no differently. Lots of people have fought and died for those rights in this country. And I hope that we can all once again begin to respect each other. And if we respect each other, then maybe we can learn to love each other too. Because this is the greatest country in the world. And there are people literally dying to try to get here. For most of us in this room, we got here out of absolutely no effort of our own. We were born here. Let's have respect for what this country gives to us by showing it respect while we exercise the rights it gave us. And if we can do that, then we set an example for the rest of the world. That'll be really, really important. So I'm running for president because I think all those values I just talked about are important to advocate for. And I can't say that if you elect me that you'll agree with everything I do every day, because you won't. Because the only person you agree with 100% of the time is you. Goes for me too. I agree with me all the time. But I also know after all these years that not anybody else does. It's about how we treat each other and how we express those views that makes this country the great democratic experiment it is. So let's continue with the experiment by asking questions. So let's do the moderated part first, and then let's get to these folks because I want to hear from them. And I apologize to the ones out in the hallway who couldn't join us.
Thank you so much, Governor, for those remarks. And I'm Anna Mahoney, for those of you who missed the introduction, and I'm the new executive director of the Rockefeller Center. And I really feel like the sentiments you expressed just now are really best embodied by Grace and the students of the DPU who've partnered with us here at the Rockefeller Center to make this conversation possible. And so I really appreciate that, and I'm very proud to be here with you today to have this conversation. So one of the questions I have been thinking about this week, we've been talking about the role that New Hampshire plays in the presidential politics in the United States, and I was wondering if you could tell us how it's been in this unique retail style context that you've been in, and if you agree that New Hampshire should remain the home of the first primary in the nation.
All right, let's get ready. It is a pandering alert coming up. I do not intend not to pander on this at all. Look, it should be, but let me tell you why it should be. Because it is the most open and transparent primary for president in the country. Undeclared voters can show up the day of the election and vote, not just members of either political party. And that makes it the most open and available process in the country, which I think is good. And look, this is my second time around the block doing this, right? So I've gotten to come to really appreciate the effort that people in New Hampshire put into this. Now, you are the presidential wine tasters of America, and you treat us that way. You look at us in the glass, you swish us around a little bit, you smell us, try to get our aroma, our bouquet, and then you slightly sip us and tease us because you smile a little bit, but not too much, make us think you kind of like us. And a lot of folks in New Hampshire say something akin to this when you say, "Can I have your support?" They'll say to you, "You're in my top 3, Governor." Inducing you to return, but not making a promise they're couldn't possibly keep. I finally, 8 years ago, I had a woman who was a rather prominent former office holder in this state who I had met with 4 times, one-on-one, asking for her support. And each time I got, first 3 times I got the old, "You're in my top 3. I'm still thinking about it" line. And finally, the fourth time I met with her, I looked at her, I said, look, you don't get to vote for 3 people. You get to vote for 1, and quite frankly, I'm getting tired of this. And she looked at me, and she took a sip of her cup of tea, and she looked back up at me, and she said, okay, we've tortured you enough. I'm with you. So I think it's a great process for us to have to go through, and it's unlike any other process in the country, given the size of the state. You know, today, for instance, just today, I've been from Keene to Nashua to Derry to Bedford to here. And there are very few other places in the country where you can do that in a day and do a morning event, do a lunch event, do a mid-afternoon event. I'm going to do an evening event in Hanover at a steakhouse here tonight and do a town hall, and then I'm going to head back over towards Logan because I'm flying out at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning to do an event in Florida. And so this state also geographically allows you to do some things that, for instance, Iowa does not.
Well, you're no worse for the wear.
Heck no. And Iowa, just get ready for this. If you go to Iowa, if any of you ever going to, someone in here will run for president someday. We're at Dartmouth. Someone will do it. And I'll prepare you for Iowa. You're going to get in the car, and you're going to see corn, and then soybeans, and then windmills. And then you'll see windmills and soybeans and corn for hours and hours and hours. So at least here you get leaves.
Well, we'll take that
leaves.
pandering.
Yeah,
That's very nice.
Pretty good.
Well, you mentioned this in your opening remarks as well, but when you were governor in New Jersey, you had to declare a state of fiscal emergency. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more in detail about the plans you have for the federal budget and the deficit as president.
Unfortunately, the president doesn't have nearly the power the governor of New Jersey has. That's literally true constitutionally. I had something called in New Jersey called the Disaster Control Act, which if I declared something to be a disaster, it gave me kind of unprecedentedly broad powers to be able to do things. And in that instance, I was able to quarantine funding that had been previously appropriated by the legislature because we had a deficit and we needed to balance it constitutionally by June 30th. No such luck in being president of the United States. So the plans fiscally really are to go to something that I did in New Jersey that worked called zero-based budgeting. And the concept is this: every department comes in every year and they use their budget of the last year as the baseline from where you start, and then they tell you how much more they need. Instead, what we did in New Jersey was to say, you're starting at zero. And the process and the purpose of doing it was to make them go through every program that they had so I could learn about it as a brand new governor, and then I could decide whether I thought it was justified or not. And what that led to was me eliminating 832 programs in my first year. I had an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget. And so it was a huge problem. It was right in the aftermath of the Great Recession and the housing collapse and all the rest. And we were affected pretty severely. But I was able to eliminate those programs and balance the budget without having to raise taxes, which we're already one of the highest tax states in the country. So I thought it was important to do that. But let me tell you what the impact of it was in the near term for me. I went from 55% job approval to 38%, because every one of those programs has a constituency. Someone who cares about it enough that they advocated for it and got it in the budget and benefited from it in some way. So you have to take that near-term political pain in order to get the fiscal house in order. So I would expect the same thing would happen kind of on steroids with the federal budget. You know, I'll become very unpopular once I do this stuff. But as was said in the introduction, 3 years later, I was reelected with 60% of the vote. In the bluest state in this country, you know, we haven't elected a Republican to the United States Senate in 50 years. It's the longest streak of any state in the country not to elect a Republican to the U.S. Senate. So it's a very blue state. And I got reelected with 60% of the vote. So they didn't always agree with what I did, but I think they liked the fact that I kept my promise, and that they could count on what I was saying would be true. And so you don't always have to worry about whether people agree with you. You should worry about whether they respect you first, and then the agreement hopefully can come a little bit later on.
Well, that's a great transition. We're a good duo because that
Oh,
brings me
good.
to my next question. Former President Donald Trump leads the polls in this primary,
I hadn't noticed.
despite many of the concerns you yourself laid out for us today. So I'm wondering what you think this says about the Republican Party today and what direction you think is possible for the party in light of this level of support.
Well, this is why we run campaigns, right? I mean, if we let polls determine who was going to be the nominee and who's going to be president, then none of us would even have to come to New Hampshire. We'd just say, okay, what's the poll look like? Pick a date when you look at the poll, and then just go, all right, he or she wins. Campaigns matter, and what candidates do or don't do matter. What it says about the party is, look, he's been the nominee the last 2 times. Now, let's say the last poll I saw here in New Hampshire had him at 41%. So let's think about that. He is essentially the incumbent in the Republican Party. If Joe Biden was at 41% in any Democratic primary right now, the press would be going bonkers. It would be like red alert time. Oh my gosh, the incumbent only has 41% support in any state in his own party. This means he's on political life support. Somehow with Donald Trump, we go, look at how much he's winning by. Well, of course he should be winning by that much. He's the incumbent. He's gotten the nomination twice. If he wasn't winning by that much, you'd really be worried about him. But that means that 59% of the Republicans in New Hampshire don't want him. So the question is, can anyone coalesce that part of the vote into a winning coalition here or in other states around the country? So I don't see Trump, and I'm not being naive about this. I mean, he's the front runner, and if the election were held today, he'd probably win the nomination. But we don't have a national primary. We have a state-by-state primary. And let's say he underperforms in Iowa for some reason. Do you think that'll change the polls? You think some people are front runners? Like, I've met a lot of front runners in this business. They want to vote for the winner. And so they say they're with the winner until that person doesn't look like they're the winner anymore. Then the next person who looks like the winner is the winner. Remember something about polls. 8 years ago, the Des Moines Register poll just came out and showed Donald Trump winning Iowa. I think it was 43% he had in Iowa. And the next closest was, I think, DeSantis at 16. But I want to remind you that 8 years ago, the October Des Moines Register poll had Ben Carson winning by 10 points. Yes, that Ben Carson. Okay? Had him winning by 10 points. In New Hampshire, 8 years ago in October, President Jeb Bush was winning the nomination. He was beating Donald Trump and everybody else in New Hampshire in October of last year, or of 8 years ago. So it seems like, I was talking to a friend of mine who works in baseball today, and he called to check in on me, and he said to me, so how's it going? And I said, let me explain it to you this way. November in a presidential campaign, November 1st, is like August 1st in the baseball season. You're close to the end, but not quite close enough. And they call that in baseball the dog days of August. And in this kind of endeavor, these are the dog days of November, December. People are getting ready. They just had Halloween. Now they're getting ready for Thanksgiving and then Christmas, and they're kind of paying attention, but not completely paying attention. And you're more of a bother than you are an informer because they're Christmas shopping and they're doing other things. And like, it's a slog that you have to get through. So, you know, what it says about our party is that there's still a plurality of the party who supports the incumbent. And whether that plurality will be enough for him to win the nomination is what the campaign is all about. But I will tell you this, if he wins the nomination, he's not going to be president. Because if you just look at his numbers, with that level of support among Republicans, that gives you a horrible indication of what his numbers are among independents. And independents are still the folks in this country who decide presidential elections in the general election. And he lost independents in a big way in 2020 to Joe Biden. And despite Joe Biden's difficulties, I think he would lose monumentally again among independents to Joe Biden. And that would mean that Joe Biden wins the election.
So a lot of baseball left to be played.
A lot of baseball left to be played, absolutely. And I'm going to keep playing it.
Well, I'm going to open it up to this great audience that we have here today. The microphone is there. Remember Grace's instructions, only 2 folks at the microphone at once. And remember to ask a question and make it succinct. We want to hear what the governor has to share with us today.
Hello, my name is Ben Bolger, and Governor Christie, thank you for coming to Dartmouth. We have a great tradition in New Hampshire of having a primary. It seems like President Biden will not participate in the New Hampshire primary. I'm just wondering what you think is the long-term implications for that for the Democratic Party. And like 2000, we have an independent candidate. We had Ralph Nader that one could argue affected that election. How do you think it will affect your ability to become president if Robert Kennedy Jr. is an independent candidate and garners a small percentage, but enough to pull voters from perhaps one side or the other?
Well, look, on the first question, I think that Joe Biden is showing incredible disrespect to the people of New Hampshire and to this process. Like, this has been going on for over 100 years, and it's worked out pretty well. And I think because he lost New Hampshire last time and the time before that when he ran, and he won South Carolina, it propelled him to the nomination, he feels like I owe it to South Carolina to put them first. Like, he gets to choose. You know, like, I'd like to put New Jersey first. How about that? I think it would really give my campaign some serious momentum. But, you know, that's not the way this should work. So I think President Biden and the Democrats here in New Hampshire who supported that move should be held to account for it, because no one's ever done that before. And no one ever has showed that level of disrespect to the voters in New Hampshire. I think it's wrong. Look, I think that, you know, for us going forward, as we look at this race and we look at what President Biden's, what the impact of this will be going forward, they can't also forget that New Hampshire is a swing state in the general election. And it's only 4 electoral votes, but George W. Bush won by 1 electoral vote in 2000, and he won by 6, I think it was, or 8 in 2004. New Hampshire is going to play an important role in this election, the general election, and that's why I think what President Biden has done by skipping this is pretty short-sighted. On RFK Jr., I'd say this, like, presidential campaigns are always difficult at the launch and trying to figure out what your role is going to be. But when 4 of your siblings write a letter saying, like, you have no business being president of the United States, and the only thing you have in common with our father is your name, and that's it, that's bad. Like, if your own siblings are, like, dumping on you at the start, that's not a good thing. I mean, my siblings had that letter drafted, but I convinced them to hold back. And so if you can't convince your own siblings, how are you going to convince anybody who's president? Look, I've met, and I don't know quite what to call him. And he doesn't, this is the way he introduces himself. Like, I met him at Fox News one day, and I said, hey, how are you? He said, hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And I'm like, so am I supposed to call you Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Like, he doesn't say, but call me Bob or Bobby or Robert. So I don't know how to refer to him. But what I will say is it depends on who are the Republican Democratic nominees in terms of who he hurts the most. If Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, he hurts Trump. Because a lot of RFK Jr.'s kind of conspiracy theory things sound a little bit like Trump. And for those voters who are concerned about Trump's legal problems and whatever, but like the conspiracy nuttiness, RFK Jr. might just be their guy. Now, if it's one of us, if it's me or Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis or Tim Scott who become the nominee, then I think he hurts Biden more. Because then the people he'll be drawing are kind of the really disaffected far-left liberals who, amazingly to me, think that Biden hasn't been liberal enough. And they think that RFK Jr. could be even more liberal than that, and they would be there for him. So I think he will affect the race, but who he impacts will depend upon who the final two folks are standing for the Republicans and the Democrats. And look, based on the polling that we've seen so far, he'd qualify for a debate. So imagine that. Let me predict this to you, too. If Donald Trump is the nominee, Joe Biden will not participate in debates next fall. And he doesn't want to participate in debates for pretty obvious reasons. Just standing for 2 hours probably would be challenging for the president. But the biggest reason, like, he just doesn't want to have to do that off the cuff kind of stuff anymore, which he used to be very good at, but he's not anymore. And he can use the excuse, well, Trump didn't participate in the Republican primary debates, so he doesn't obviously care about debates, so why should I participate in these? And he'll also probably say something like, and he's the worst threat to democracy in American history, and so I'm not giving him a platform. So you could wind up with a situation where you have presidential debates if Trump's the nominee, because I think if Trump's not the nominee, Biden will participate. He'll be forced to. But if Trump is nominated, you can have presidential debates between Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And I'm telling you, the freak show that will be like kind of beyond any comprehension you have. You'll turn the TV off after 2 hours and go, where do I live? Is there a possibility I could immigrate to another country? Because it'll be a freak show. So that's my thought on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Christie. Well, you talked earlier about the windmills in Iowa, and now I'm going to ask you about the windmills in New Jersey.
Right.
So, the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan bill brought historic investment to renewables. And I'd like to, but 2 days ago or so, a huge renewables project was canceled in the state of New Jersey. So I'd like to ask about your approach to securing America's energy future, especially in light of instability in the Middle East, China's grip on the solar market, and the existential threat of climate change to our globe.
Okay. Good question. I'll answer that in a few different ways. One, just so you're clear on this, I believe climate change is real, and I think that human activity contributes to it. I don't think there's really any scientific doubt about that. So we need to work on that. I'm someone who takes an all of the above energy approach because of all the threats you just talked about. I don't think we can rely on any one particular type of energy because each of them have their own individual threats and their own individual insecurities about them in terms of their technology. So I think that we have an abundance of natural gas in this country. It has a lower carbon footprint than home heating oil, for instance. As a heating factor, we should be using it. But I also think on the electric side that we should be using nuclear much more broadly. It probably would surprise you to know that in my state of New Jersey, which is the most densely populated state in the country, that 53% of our electricity is generated by nuclear. We've been operating nuclear safely in New Jersey for 45 years. And it is safe, reliable, and it contributes nothing to our carbon footprint. And so Georgia just is the first state in the country in decades to open a new nuclear power plant. I think that's a good thing. And as president, I would encourage more development of nuclear to solidify the grid because of point three. Point three is that whether you're talking about wind or whether you're talking about solar, they don't create enough energy yet in their current iteration of their technology to be baseline contributors to the grid. So you've got to figure out ways to have other sources for that also help us to lower our carbon output. And I think nuclear is one of the ways to go about that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to try to develop wind and solar. We should. In fact, when I was governor of New Jersey, we were the second largest solar producing state in the country. But it's still only about that much of our overall need. So we have to continue to refine that. And that's where American innovation comes in. And we should continue to have private sector and the government invest in innovation that helps to broaden our energy footprint. On electric vehicles, I'd just say, like, let's let the market decide. I mean, you had a situation this summer where Governor Newsom in California, who's the biggest advocate for going to gas-free vehicles by 2030, sent out an advisory this summer telling California residents not to plug in their electric vehicles because they'd crash the grid. Well, I could tell you, your electric vehicle that isn't charged is no longer a vehicle. It's a planter. Like it doesn't move if you don't plug it in, right? So I'm fine with electric vehicles, and I see lots of EVs around now, particularly Teslas. And why do you see more Teslas than any other electric vehicle? Because people like them, and people want to buy them. They think they're cool. They like the way they operate. They like the technology in the car. Elon Musk didn't become the wealthiest man in the world because of government subsidies that contributed to it. But what was bigger was the fact that he built a car that people wanted to buy. So let's build electric vehicles that people want to buy, and let's not force them down people's throats, especially because we don't have the grid available to us to support. If everybody replaced their gas-powered vehicle today with an electric vehicle, the lights would go out because we're not prepared for that. So let's be smart about it and prepare for a time where electric vehicles become the majority vehicle in this country. But we're not there yet. We're not ready for it yet. And we need to do that. And one of the ways I think we do it is increasing the use of natural gas, but also increasing nuclear in a significant way. Lastly, what I'd say about carbon output in general is, we can't keep beating up on ourselves. In the last 10 years, the United States has lowered its carbon output by 1 billion tons a year every year. At the same time, China has increased their carbon output by 5 billion tons a year every year for the last 10 years. So we're not going to fix this global problem on our own. And one of the priorities in terms of helping our relationship with China get better is to have real serious conversations about climate with them, because they're burning coal over there in big, big amounts. And it's adding to the carbon footprint in a multiple that's much greater than anything we're doing here in the U.S. So it's real. Human activity contributes to it. We all should be striving to leave cleaner water and cleaner air for the next generation. And the way to do that, I think, is to have a policy that recognizes what we need for energy, but tries to focus more on the ones that don't increase our carbon footprint, and use that carbon just for the things that we need to solidify our grid. That's the way I'd go about it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Governor Christie. Now, I'm from Georgia, so I've been engulfed in all the information about the trials going on in Fulton County. And I just want to ask you, how do you think a possible conviction of Donald Trump, especially given the recent guilty plea, could impact the presidential primaries and elections, especially given the fact that at your presidential primary debate, most people said that they would still support Donald Trump given a conviction?
Yeah, not me.
I did notice that.
I didn't raise my hand. Look, I think the bare minimum we should expect from a presidential candidate is that they not be a convicted felon. Like, I don't know. Never, ever in my life did I think saying that would get me applause. I have to tell you the truth. I really didn't. That's how crazy politics is right now. If you say, the President of the United States should not be a convicted felon, be like, yeah! Like, excellent. All right, they should be alive, too. Yes! I mean, like, there's certain things that are just should be true, right? But here we are, living in the world we're living in. Look, I think the single most important thing affecting this presidential race happened last week, and I don't think it's gotten nearly as much attention as it's going to get as we go forward. And that is that Mark Meadows, the president's former chief of staff, has signed a cooperating agreement with the federal government and gotten immunity in return, and will testify against Donald Trump at his trial starting on March 4th. Now, I want you all to think about this. This is not like some, what Trump would call, deranged rogue prosecutor. This is not a product of the two-tiered system of justice. No, no. This is one of the founders of the Freedom Caucus in the Republican House. This is a guy who, when he made him White House Chief of Staff, he said he was the next James Baker. Like, this is somebody who Trump loved. And he's going to sit as far away as I am from you in a federal courtroom in District of Columbia, and he's going to say under oath, Donald Trump committed crimes and lied to try to overturn the 2020 election to keep himself in office. Guilty. He's going to be found guilty now. There's no doubt in my mind. I did this for 7 years. I ran the 5th largest prosecuting office in the country for 7 years. And in New Jersey, we are known for our crime. They do TV shows about our crime. All right? Yes. I actually, 8 years ago, I had a woman in Iowa, no joke, at a town hall meeting, raised her hand to ask a question. I called on her, and she said, "You're from New Jersey, right?" I said, "I am actually the governor of New Jersey as we speak. Yes, I'm from New Jersey." And she said, "Do you know Tony Soprano?" And I said, "Well, if what you mean is, do I know James Gandolfini, the actor who plays Tony Soprano?" Yes, I did know Jim. I said, but unfortunately, he tragically died about 3 years ago, but he's a wonderful guy, and yes, I know him. She said to me, no. I mean the real Tony Soprano. So we're known for our crime. And I can tell you, he's going to be found guilty. And the impact on the race, you know, there'll be a number of primaries done by then. So I can't tell you what for sure, because I don't know what's going to happen in those earlier primaries. But if he were to be the nominee, it will have an enormous impact on the general election. Right now, all this stuff is kind of theoretical to people. Oh, yeah, he's been indicted, and either you hate the prosecutors or you love the prosecutors. You hate Trump or you love Trump, and so people can dismiss indictments. When the trial starts, and every day you turn on the news, and it's going to be more testimony about the crimes Donald Trump committed from Mark Meadows, from 3 of his lawyers who have pled guilty in Georgia and have agreed to cooperate in the federal case, then it's real. And guess what, everybody? He's going to jail. This judge in the District of Columbia has sentenced January 6th conspirators to 18, 20, 22 years in jail. If you think she's going to send the people who stormed the Capitol to jail for 18 to 22 years and she's going to give Donald Trump a pass, you can forget it. So this is real. And New Hampshire voters need to get that too. Like, you know, before Meadows was testifying, you could argue about it. This guy was his chief of staff. He was Velcroed to his hip for the entire 2020 campaign and the aftermath. So I think it's the most significant thing that's happened in this race so far this year. And it's going to lead to some really, really ugly moments for him in that courtroom. And you see him acting crazier than normal lately, right? Like he said he was in Sioux Falls when he was in Sioux City. He said the other day that that anybody who believed that he was actually going to get Mexico to pay for the wall is just stupid. Now, I don't know. I was here 8 years ago, right? He must have said that like 3,000 times here, that Mexico was going to pay for the wall. Now he's saying, you were stupid for believing me. Well, then what are you saying now? And would we be just as stupid or even more stupid to believe anything you say to us now? So I think he's starting to lose it a little bit because of the pressure. Look, I've prosecuted lots and lots of people, federal prosecutions. They're the most serious thing that can happen to somebody in their lives other than a health problem. And the pressure that comes from knowing that caption reads, "The United States of America versus Donald Trump." The power, the authority of the United States is coming to get you because of what you did. And now your own chief of staff is saying you're guilty. So I think it's an important question, and I think it will have a great impact. I just don't know about the timing and what that'll mean ultimately for our nomination. But it's not like we don't know enough now. Like you can't go, act like it's not there. It's there. And there's enough information out there now for all of you to make a decision about whether you're comfortable with the nominee of the Republican Party very likely being a convicted felon. Apparently, all of the adversaries of mine who are going to be on the stage with me on Wednesday night in Miami are all comfortable with it. Well, let you judge them by that. I'm not comfortable with it. And remember, when I did not raise my hand in Milwaukee, I got booed by like 7,000 people. And you know what? I don't care, because it's right. It's right. And sometimes you got to be willing to be booed. And the problem with politics today is nobody's willing to be booed. They all want to be loved. They want to tell you exactly what you want to hear. If that's the kind of candidate you're looking for, you can leave now, because I ain't it. And I never will be, but I'll always tell you the truth. And the truth about that is he's in big trouble, and it's either going to have an effect on the primary or the general or both, but it's going to have an effect.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor, for joining us today.
That's it?
And that's it. The clock has run
Oh,
out.
hold on. This isn't right. One more.
Okay,
Take another one. Let's
one
go.
more
You can't do
question.
that.
Thank you very much, Governor. You've spoken a lot about New Jersey tonight, and I'd like to say, as in addition to yourself, the only other Livingston High School alum here on campus. I'd like to
Incredible.
say,
A fellow Lancer. Tremendous. All right.
go Lancers. And during your introduction, you spoke a lot about how previous presidents have handled unforeseen crises that have occurred in the United States. And I'm just wondering, in your own words, what you would say makes you the person that we should put our trust in to handle those future crises for our country.
Look, I think, unlike any other candidate in this race, maybe other than Trump, you've seen me for the longest time under lots of different circumstances. You've seen me as a prosecutor that prosecuted the first two anti-terrorism cases after 9/11, which happened much longer ago than you can remember, but some people around here will. You saw me as a governor of a blue state having to navigate making bipartisanship work, because if you didn't make it work, you'd sit there and do nothing for 8 years with a Democratic legislature. You've seen me run for president and stand up for the things that I believe in, whether they were popular at the moment or not. Things like Social Security reform and other things that we didn't get to tonight, but that if you come to the town hall that I'm having at Jesse's Steakhouse right after this, you're more than welcome. I can maybe answer those. But I've been tested. And I've been tested by difficult times in the toughest media market in this country, in New York and Philadelphia media markets, the first and fourth largest ones in the country. I've been tested by having been defeated, and how do you come back from defeat? And I've been tested right now by my own party about whether I'm willing to tell the truth or not. It is not the most popular thing to be saying the truth about Donald Trump inside today's Republican Party, but I'm doing it. And what I hope that tells you is that I'm willing to do it about that. I'm willing to do it about anything else. And in the end, you also have to assess, and only you guys could do this, but assess what you think is in someone's heart. And what's your motivation for really doing this? And if I really will put you first ahead of my own politics. And the only tangible example I can give you tonight, and I'll end with this, was when Hurricane Sandy came. Now remember, Hurricane Sandy happened 11 years ago last Friday or last Saturday. And it was 8 days before the presidential election between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. I had been keynote speaker for Mitt Romney at his convention nominating him, and was probably his most active surrogate around the country campaigning for Romney. And then the hurricane comes, and the day after the hurricane, I get a call from President Obama, who says to me, I want to come tomorrow and see for myself. And I had people around the table with me who said, no, don't let him come. You know, you get the election in 6 days at that point, and don't let him come, because you're with Romney, and this is going to give Obama this platform standing with you. You can't do that. And I said to all of them around the table who were saying it, shut up. We get one president at a time. And my job is to make sure this state recovers. And I know I'm going to take hell for this, but he's coming. And I greeted him when he got to the airport in Atlantic City. And if you go back, you can see this online. We shook hands with each other. And stand up for a sec. You're me, I'm Obama, right? So we shake hands, and Obama, do it this way, and Obama put his left hand on my shoulder like this, and they took a picture. They called that a hug. Now, now, those of us from New Jersey know that they ain't no hug. When we hug, we hug. And it became this huge thing that like 6 days before the election, Christie hugged Obama, et cetera, because I said that he did a good job. I got asked, how's the president been doing so far? I said, the president's given me everything I've asked for, and he's trying to help, and it's great for him to be here today to see our citizens who are suffering. Remember, we lost, you know this, but we lost 346,000 homes in 24 hours. I mean, this was a disaster only rivaled by Katrina in the history of this country. And I said nice things about him at the press conference because he deserved them, because it was true. And we then got on Marine One to take a tour of the coastline. And Marine One, you're sitting like much closer than even we are, across from each other. So we sit down on the helicopter, and he says to me, look, Governor, I just want to tell you, those were some really nice things you said about me out there, and I know this puts you in a difficult position, and I just want you to know that I appreciate it. I said, well, Mr. President, everything I said was true, so it wasn't that hard for me. I understand the politics, but the truth is the truth, and we're just going to do it. Now, after that, there's like this awkward silence between the two of us, right? Like staring at each other, like, what do you say now? and so I just looked at him and I said, you know I'm not voting for you, right? And he said, I wasn't worried about that. I'm like, good. You got to be honest with people. And I think that what you should know from that incident, and remember now, that was in 2012. 4 years later, when I'm running in the primary up here, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, and Ted Cruz all sent out mail and did TV commercials with that handshake saying, Chris Christie, judge him by the company he keeps in a Republican primary. So I knew that was going to happen. So the way you should judge all this, in my view, is who has a record of showing you that they really are willing to do the tough things, not just be a TV tough guy. Not just talk about the hard things, but actually do it. And I'm proud of the fact that I did. And I never considered any other alternative, because the people of my state who elected me were suffering. And I needed every bit of help I could get. And what did they want me to do? Wear my Romney sweatshirt when I was, welcoming Obama to the state? Forget it. I'm going to show them the respect that any president deserves. One at a time. And so those are some of the ways I think you should make your judgments. And in the end, I'm comfortable to be judged that way. And that means when I become president, if you're a Republican, I'm not always going to do everything you want me to do if I don't believe it's in the best interest of the country. And I would say the same thing to the Democrats down there. I'm not going to do what you want me to do. I'm going to do what's in the best interest of the country. We need an honest broker down there who's going to advocate for getting things done. We shouldn't be taking a victory lap because we took 3 weeks to elect a speaker. We shouldn't be taking a victory lap because maybe we won't close the government. Like these are things that in today's politics in Washington, they like celebrate over. It is the basics that they're getting wrong, let alone let us to aspire to bigger things. Could you imagine in today's Washington, D.C., John F. Kennedy saying, we're going to send a man to the moon and back in this decade? Can you imagine Ronald Reagan standing in front of Congress and saying, we are going to end the evil empire and do everything we can to end the Soviet Union, and then getting it done in 10 years? You can't imagine anybody doing something big like that, because we haven't had a president who's done it since Reagan. For a very short period of time, George W. Bush did it after 9/11. united the country, and led us towards protecting ourselves in a united way. But after that short period of time when Iraq started, the country got divided again, and then that was the end of that. So, you know, we deserve better. And if I'm lucky enough to get this job, you can count on this. I won't be worrying about the next 4 years after my first 4. I won't. I want to do 4 years of consequence. Doesn't mean I won't run for re-election. I don't want to be reelected. It just means I won't act like it. And that's what I did in New Jersey when we cut all those programs. And people said to me, you got to be worried about being reelected. And I said, I'm not. And they said, why not? And I said, because I already get the portrait. All you got to do is win once. You win once, they paint a portrait of you. I never thought anybody would paint a portrait of me for any reason. Now I get a portrait, and they're going to hang it up in the State House and leave it there for the rest of time. If I have grandkids someday, they're going to be able to go to the State House and go, the old man was not always senile. Look it. He actually did something. If you know you're already getting the portrait, you know all you're arguing over then? The little brass plaque. And whether it says 4 years or 8 years. Well, I'll guarantee you this. In New Jersey, I didn't sell my soul for the little brass plaque. And if I become president of the United States, you can be damn sure I won't. And maybe that's the way you should judge whether somebody deserves this job or they shouldn't. Thanks for the question, fellow Lancer. And this is a great joke among my staff because it doesn't matter where we go. Anywhere we go in this country, I find someone from Livingston. They come up to me out of nowhere, I'm from Livingston, and the staff's like, oh, Jesus. He's going to be talking about this now for the rest of the night. What year did you graduate?
2023.
Fabulous. Now I feel as old as I am. He graduated in 2023. I graduated in 1980. 80. Thank you, fellow Lancer. And thank you guys for coming tonight. I really appreciate it very much.
With Matt Delmont. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Oh, thank you.